Let me start by saying thank you all for chiming in during this, what I think is for most of you, a lunch hour, late lunch hour. This is really exciting for us because I think my guess is all of you know that we have spent a number of years now trying to really build a movement of public defenders to transform criminal justice in some of the most broken systems in the country. 4 years ago, we started this pipeline called the Law School Partnership Project, and we've probably brought about 4 dozen law students from across the country to offices primarily in the Deep South, who otherwise would not have been able to get down here. And those folks have helped make up a really sort of powerful community of public defenders who are forcing broken systems to rethink what justice means. I'm hoping that some of you listening today will be joining us next summer or beyond. So let me start by I want to tell you a little bit about what brought me down here and why I started doing this work. I started my career as a public defender in Washington, D.C. And when I came out of law school, there were a handful of public defender offices that really anyone ever talked about going to. They were the offices in the country that tended to be the best resourced. They had they had infrastructure that sort of really worked well. They had very well established training programs. They were places like DC, Philadelphia. They were in New York, San Francisco, Seattle. I don't mean to leave anyone out, but there were a handful of offices that were sort of seen as the places one would go to. And so I went to the DC Public Defender Service and I started to learn to practice public defense at a very high level. I felt like, although I worked 7 hours a week, sometimes 60, 70, 80 hours a week, I felt like I was able to give every client the kind of representation they deserved. And then after a decade at PDS, I was invited to come to Georgia to be the first training director for Georgia's new statewide public defender system. And it seemed like a great once in a lifetime opportunity to be in on the ground floor of an opportunity to kind of try to build a public defender system from the ground up. And I came to Georgia to be the training director. And I started to meet these young lawyers who were passionate, who were filled with energy, who were as smart and talented as the folks I worked with in DC. But it was clear to me that they would never be able to give their clients the kind of representation that they deserved, at least not all of them. Not because they were lesser lawyers, but because they were in systems that, quite frankly, wouldn't allow them to. Many of them had 300-400 cases. There were expectations that they would process human beings. And what I found was that after a couple of years, these really passionate, committed public defenders, one of two things would happen to them. Either they would quit because they'd be so beaten down, or they would just start to become resigned to the status quo. And they'd start to become part of the problem. They would start to process human beings and not even realize they were doing it. After a couple of years in Georgia, Hurricane Katrina hit, and I went to New Orleans, helped with the effort to rebuild that public defender office. I did some work in Alabama, Mississippi, and I kept seeing the same thing. Young lawyers going into broken systems, trying their best to do the work their clients deserved, and just finding that the systems were beating them back. So in 2007, my wife and I started a nonprofit called the Southern Public Defender Training Center that has now grown into Gideon's Promise. And the idea was that not only would we offer young lawyers the training that they needed, but also, and maybe more importantly, we would give them a supportive community and teach them strategies so that they could resist those pressures to give into the status quo, so they could push back against the unjust systems, and so they could slowly start to change those systems. And what grew out of that is Gideon's Promise. We started with a 3-year program for new public defenders. We would bring a class together, and they would go through a 2-week boot camp. They would go back to their respective offices, but they'd be connected to Gideon's Promise through mentors, We had an online community where we would share resources, we'd share successes, we'd share challenges, and those lawyers would come back together every 6 months for 3 years as they learned to both be better lawyers and to support one another in this effort. And what we came to realize was that young lawyers going into broken systems alone couldn't overcome the culture. So we started to develop more programs. We started a leadership program so that now all of the offices we partner with have chief public defenders and leadership teams that come to Gideon's Promise every 6 months for leadership training, to learn to be better office managers, but also to learn how to better and more effectively advocate externally in their jurisdictions for the change that is so desperately needed. We started a trainer development program to start training trainers and supervisors on the model that we teach, so they would better understand both how to export it and how to support their own lawyers when they came from Gideon's Promise back to their offices. We started a graduate program because after 3 years, we graduated our young lawyers, and they were wondering what happens to us now. So we started a graduate program to both continue their lawyering development, but also to teach them to be mentors and trainers and leaders, tomorrow's leaders of this movement. And then lastly, we developed partnerships with law schools. And that's really what I want to talk about for the rest of this time. So we've done a couple of things. First, we started to develop relationships with first and second year law students. And we developed a summer law clerk program. Because what I realized were all of these public defenders of my generation, when we were in law school, if we did our summers in public defender offices, they were really in these offices that were already doing a pretty good job. The idea of going to Georgia or Mississippi or Alabama for a summer never crossed my mind as a law student. So we decided we wanted to give law students a chance to spend time in our partner offices, working under the supervision of the lawyers who have gone through Gideon's Promise, so that they could get an understanding of what it's like to be a public defender in a less perfect environment, in a less ideal environment, in a place where the need is the greatest. We then started this law school partnership project where we started partnering with law schools across the country. And I think to date we partnered with about 24, half a dozen of which are on this call. And the idea was that law schools would join us in their commitment to send some of the most talented future public defenders to places where the need is the greatest. The law school would agree to support the graduate for a year, while we would place them in one of our partner offices that might not have the resources to hire them right away, but that could commit to getting those resources within that first year. And so we could parlay these 1-year law school fellowships into permanent positions. And part of the commitment we've made at Gideon's Promise is to raise the resources to make sure everyone in the Law School Partnership Project goes through Gideon's Promise and gets that training and support. And so that's really the options that are available to you all. I want to try to answer a few questions that I'm commonly asked. And after I talk for a little while longer, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open it up to you all for questions. And then after I answer your questions, if you have logistical questions, I'm going to switch seats with Liz Jones, who was a member of the 2009 class. She went to New Orleans from Georgetown and is now our Director of Training and Recruitment. And she'll be able to answer any logistical questions. But Liz, Afton Mallard, who is the other member of our programs team, those are the two people who you will be communicating with primarily as you're exploring how you can join the Gideon's Promise movement community. So some questions that I'm frequently asked. One thing I'm asked is, they'll say to me, you know, Rap, and everybody calls me Rap. I know Betsy Nevins, who's at Hofstra, is, if she hasn't already gotten bored and walked away, she's on this call. We were public defenders together in DC. Everyone I know, everyone who's a friend of mine calls me Rap, so y'all should call me Rap. And one question I get quite often is, they'll say, Rap, you started at PDS. It is a model public defender office. It is known as the best, if not one of the best public defender offices in the country. If I have a chance to go to PDS, Bronx Defenders, Neighborhood Defender Services of Harlem, Philly, San Francisco, one of these better established, better funded offices, or if I could come join you guys in the South at Gideon's Promise, what should I do? And I'll tell you, I always respond that I can't answer that question for you because I think that's a really, it's a very personal question. The decision is based on your own personal priorities. But I think what I can tell you is this, something I didn't understand in law school. When I was in law school, I knew I wanted to be a public defender. And once I decided to be a public defender, the path was already made for me. I was just going to look to the half a dozen sort of best established offices in the country. And that's what I did. And I ended up at PDS. The thought of coming to Alabama or Louisiana or Texas was never on my radar, right? There wasn't training. There wasn't support. What we've done through Gideon's Promise is we've created a pipeline to go to places that weren't on my radar when I was a law student. And so I think now you have to ask yourself, not only do you want to be a public defender, and if you are sitting in a room listening to this webinar, I think you're already starting to answer that question. I think the second question is, if I do, what kind of public defender do I want to be? So what do I mean by that? I think you could go to a place like DC and you could literally become the lawyer your client deserves. You'll become the best lawyer you could be because you will have 6 weeks of training. You will be surrounded by some of the best lawyers in the city. You will have supervisors literally right next door. You'll have manageable caseloads and investigators and expert resources. You'll develop into the lawyer that you really want to become. But I would also say this, if you go to DC, for example, you won't do a thing to raise the standard of representation for poor people in DC. It's already incredibly high. I think I was part of a line of lawyers who helped maintain an already really high level of practice. And I recognize that if I didn't go to DC, there were a line of 100 third-year law students, just as talented as me, who wanted that position. And if I didn't go to DC, one of them would have stepped in and they would have given those clients excellent representation, and the quality of justice in DC wouldn't have suffered because I chose not to go, right? I helped maintain a really high standard of representation that existed long before I thought about going to law school. But if you decide to come to Georgia or Mississippi or Alabama, okay, you will almost certainly have a caseload that is higher than you can responsibly handle. You won't have all of the resources that you need. You'll have access to an amazing community through Gideon's Promise, but those folks won't be in the same office with you, accessible by walking down the hall. And you will necessarily, while you are working your hardest, you will watch people fall through the cracks. Not because you're a poor lawyer, but because you're in a system that is designed to fail poor people. But I'll tell you this, if you don't come to Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, there will be a void that is left unfilled. If you come to Gideon's Promise, you will not be able to give every client the representation they deserve, but what you will do is you'll be part of a community that is starting to increase the standard of representation slowly over time. You'll be part of the front line of a movement to provide equal justice to poor people in places where otherwise equal justice wouldn't even be a possibility. Right? So I think you have to ask yourself, do you want to be the best lawyer you can be in a system that really doesn't need you? They need lawyers, but there are plenty of lawyers they can choose from. Or do you want to go to a place where the need is greatest, where you can truly be part of a movement to change? But doing that comes with some sacrifice. It takes an emotional toll on you to know you can't give every person the representation they deserve. But I would urge you to think about that, because I often say that the work we're doing is this generation's civil rights movement. This is the most important civil rights work being done. And I'll analogize to the civil rights movement of the 60s. And I'll often say, look, people were doing really good work in New York and in Philadelphia and in Washington, D.C. But the real progress of that movement was because people got on buses and joined committed activists in the South, and they went to the front lines. Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana. Change wouldn't have happened if it weren't for people who were willing to go where the need is greatest. And I believe that's true in criminal justice. I believe that now, if we're going to realize the criminal justice system our clients deserve, it's going to be because we expand beyond going to places that already are doing it well. And we go to the places that we never thought of as ever possibly being able to live up to a standard of justice. And so I think what we offer at Gideon's Promise is a growing movement of people who have said, I've made the latter choice. And we are looking for people to join us, people that want to make that choice. It's not nearly as difficult for you as it was for Liz Jones, as it was for people that came in 2007, 2008, when there were a couple dozen of us, as opposed to several hundred of us. But it's still difficult. It's still challenging. And especially what I would urge you to think about is, if you do decide to come join Gideon's Promise, where do you want to go? Because even within Gideon's Promise, there are offices with greater need. I would say that over the last 10 years, we've had a huge impact in places like New Orleans and Nashville, right? Those are probably more successful examples of how our movement has really helped build a strong public defender office. And we still send people to those offices, and those offices still have progress to make. But we also are working with offices like Augusta, Georgia. We're working with offices like St. Tammany Parish, Louisiana, Knoxville, Tennessee. These are offices that tend to be in smaller communities. They're not as popular. They are places where the need is even greater among a population of offices with great need. And so there are some of you, the types that probably said as college students, I want to be in the Peace Corps, and I want to go to a country that doesn't have electricity or running water because they really need me. Those of you with that kind of mindset, we really need you. And so I hope you will think a lot about whether this movement is right for you and where you fit within this movement. I want to share one last story with you, and I think some of you have heard me tell this story, some of you haven't, but I want to share it with you, and at the risk of some of you hearing it twice. I will tell you one call that I get frequently from young lawyers. We bring a new class in every summer. Last summer, we had 60 lawyers go to, I think, probably a dozen and a half offices. And they come spend 2 weeks with us. They leave thinking they could change the world. They're all fired up. And within a couple of weeks, the phone starts ringing, and me and Liz and Afton and all of the mentors that we have, seasoned public defenders who serve as mentors, our phones start ringing. And the calls all go something like this. So say, Rap, I now understand what every poor person deserves. I can't give it to them. I think I'm going to quit. Right? They say, I was all fired up 2 months ago. Now I think I'm going to quit. I've got 300 cases. I can't give everyone what they deserve. And I always share with them a story that I took from a book I read a few years ago called Freedom Summer. It was about the movement in Mississippi, where young folks from around the country, younger than you, college students, got on buses, came to Mississippi to partner with civil rights activists in the South to build freedom schools, to educate people to pass literacy tests, to knock on doors, to register people to vote. And the book was written by a man named Bruce Watson, and he tells the story through the voice of the activists who actually were in Mississippi, albeit 40 years later. He interviews them 40 years later. And through their interviews, you learn about Freedom Summer. And you learn that they went to Mississippi thinking they could change the world. And they started knocking on doors. And one after the other, doors would be slammed in their faces. They'd be told, I can't be seen talking to you. Right? The church down the street was bombed. My life could be in danger. And over the summer, you see that their hope turns to despair. They start thinking they're not making a difference. They're saying things like, maybe my family was right. Maybe none of this matters. And Bruce Watson fast forwards to a conversation he had with Congressman John Lewis 40 years later. John Lewis was one of the architects of Freedom Summer. And John Lewis said, if it weren't for Freedom Summer, Barack Obama wouldn't be in the White House. Right? Quite literally, he was saying that sometimes change is so incremental that those most involved in it don't even recognize that's what they're doing. And I share that with our lawyers, and I say to them, every time you walk into a courtroom and you stand up and you say, Judge, I'm not doing it today. I'm not processing people today. I refuse to participate. When you stand up and you refuse to go along with what's happening, you may not get that tangible result that your client deserves. But when you do that, and your colleague is doing it in the next courtroom over, and there's another group in the next county over, and another group in the next state over, collectively, you're raising expectations about what justice means for poor people. That's what Gideon's promise is all about. It's not about any one lawyer coming down and feeling like they've been able to give every client what they deserve. That's not possible. It's about every lawyer understanding they're part of a much bigger movement that collectively is pushing us to a world that I want my children to grow up and live in, right? That's what this is about. It's about a future. I don't want to sugarcoat it. I don't want to suggest this work isn't really, really hard. For those of you who are first year, second year students, I hope if you're considering this, you'll come spend a summer and see what the work is like, because it's hard, but it's so rewarding. For those of you who are third year students who are considering applying through the Law School Partnership Project, we want you to reach out to the offices we work with. Talk to our public defenders in those offices. Ask them the hard questions that you need to know to make sure this is something you want to do. Because we don't want to just bring you down here and have you in 6 months decide it's not for you. We want to bring you down here so that 10 years from now, you are a leader in these offices. You're a leader in Gideon's Promise. You're a leader in this movement. That's really what we're looking for. So before I answer questions, let me just say, I think you all know this, but we have a list of, for Law School Partnership Project, we have a list of participating offices, 13 offices online. You can go to our website. The programs tab has, you can go to the LSPP tab, and there will be a description of each office. There'll be information about what that office is like. Again, we can put you in touch with folks if you want to talk to them, but that deadline is October 20th, so it's coming up. For those of you who are first and second year law students who are thinking about spending a summer with us, those placements are also on our website. I think you have a little bit more time. Those applications won't be due until after the new year. Oh, I'm sorry, November 2nd. November 2nd, those applications will be due. So with that, let me do this, because I could talk all day. You guys don't have all day, and I know that our folks in New York only have till 2. Let me ask Afton and Liz, is there anything you all feel like I need to cover before I open it up for questions? No? So let me open it up for questions. Any questions you all have, and then when we're done asking me questions, if they're administrative questions, I'm going to switch seats with Liz Jones. Hold on. Someone here wrote, what does this say? It's from, let's see. Nita Borshansky says, can you make me the presenter? I don't know if what you're saying is, rap's terrible. We need a new presenter. No, I'm just kidding. All right, let's see. UCLA, when you return, can you close your webcam? All right, I think that's it. Any questions? Type them in if you have them. Otherwise, I just keep talking. Asking from BU. I went to Tulane for undergrad, so I love New Orleans and have connections there. My only hesitation is taking the LA bar. It seems impossible if you don't go to a Louisiana law school. Is there any assistance for LA bar prep? Liz may speak to this as well. What I can tell you is we don't have assistance for LA bar prep. I think that if you're going to take the LA bar, you will prepare either Kaplan or Barbary. You'll take a course designed to prepare you for the Louisiana bar. I can tell you that we have sent lots of lawyers to Louisiana, not just New Orleans, from law schools all over the country. Liz is one of them. While it's true that the out-of-state bar passage rate is always lower in Louisiana than the in-state, our lawyers tend to be very successful. Just Friday, the bar results came back from Louisiana. Every one of our lawyers placed in New Orleans passed the Louisiana bar. So I don't want to, the bar is difficult no matter where you go, and Louisiana has some additional wrinkles. I would not allow the bar exam to be the thing that keeps you from going to a place where you want to practice. You are all smart enough, and if you put the time in and you make bar passage your summer job and your priority, I'm confident you'll do fine. I'm going to turn this to Liz. Liz is going to give you another one.
Hi, and you can email me directly about the bar, but I went to Georgetown and took the Louisiana bar and passed it. So if you have additional questions, I did Barbary for the Louisiana bar, but it's possible. And then I would also mention, if you have Louisiana connections, there's New Orleans, but we also partner with St. Tammany Parish, and we also have a partner office in Lafayette, Louisiana as well. So, and East Baton Rouge, yeah.
Other quick, can I have your email address, Liz? Thank you. Liz is just Elizabeth, spelled the normal way, elizabeth@gideonspromise.org. She's typing it in as we speak. Let me see, I have a question up here. Can you give us an idea of what you're looking for from, say, a 1L who hasn't got a lot of experience already? So, first of all, by virtue of the fact that you're a 1L, it's not uncommon that you don't have a lot of experience already. And in fact, the idea that you might want to spend your first summer doing this work, I think, speaks volumes about your interest. I really believe that what I always tell my students, I teach law school, when they talk about summers, some of them feel real pressure to find a summer job that pays. And I really get that, particularly law firms that pay a lot. And I get that pressure. But what I always tell my students is you have 3 years to figure out your purpose in this career. There's nothing more depressing in my mind. That may be a little hyperbole, but there's nothing more depressing in my mind than a lawyer who hates what they do every day. There are a lot of lawyers who hate their jobs. And what I always say to my students is you have to spend 3 years figuring out your purpose in this work. So I look at summer as an opportunity to get a free education as opposed to the education you now are paying a tremendous amount of money for. It's a free education that will help you answer that question. Is this my purpose? And if there's any way you can do it, I think it's well worth investing in. What are we looking for? We're looking for a law student that says, I am interested in exploring this. That's all we're looking for at this stage, because after you spend a summer there, you're going to be able to better help us understand whether you're a good fit. Right? And you're going to better know if this is the right fit for you. So honestly, we're not looking for a whole lot from you as a 1L thinking about their first summer. I'll tell you, as we look a couple years down the line, what we're looking for when we're thinking about bringing people on permanently is we want to have a sense that you're not someone who's going to decide in 6 months or a year, this really isn't for me. I made a mistake. Can we guarantee that? Never. But the kinds of things that help us know that you've thought about this and that make us more confident that you probably understand what you're getting into are things like, have you done a clinic? Now, I know some of you go to law schools that don't have clinics. Instead of that, have you done externships with public defender offices? Do you have experience, not even necessarily with public defender offices, but working with the communities that public defenders serve, low income communities in any capacity? There are people who are former teachers or who did civil legal aid work, right? Which lets us know you know something about the community. Who are your mentors? Who are you connected to, right? Are you connected to people, professors or professionals in the community who have experience with public defense and who we understand probably have helped you understand what you're getting into? Do you have some connection to the places where you're thinking about going? And that's not necessary, but certainly connections make it a little bit easier to adjust, although that's not necessary. The other thing I want to point out is I've been talking about the South, but really one thing we've really done in the last few years is while the nucleus of Gideon's Promise still is in the Deep South, we've increasingly developed partnerships, sort of like spokes, all across the country. So you'll see for LSPP, we have partnerships. We're placing people in Kentucky, which still is, for some folks, the South, Ohio, Cincinnati, West Virginia, Charleston. We have partnerships as far north as Sioux Falls, South Dakota. We just had our first partnership in Novato County, California this summer. So we really do also place people beyond the South. Let's see. VU, is the LSPP office list finalized? We're surprised not to see Memphis included. Yes, so yes, this list is now finalized. Memphis was not included only because right now they are potentially going through a transition. The head of that office, who's been a long time supporter and partner of Gideon's Promise, has announced his retirement. And I think because they're not sure yet who's going to step in, he didn't feel comfortable making the commitment for next year, given that he won't be the person in place when you all graduate. I am confident that Memphis will be back on the list for the next cycle, but they're off this cycle because there's some transition and just a little bit of uncertainty with respect to who's going to be leading the office in the spring. What would you suggest for part-time students with full-time jobs who can't really participate in their school's clinics, still really want to get the experience to see if this is their purpose? So, right. So again, I laid out a list of things that we look for, but I also think the individual narrative is really important. If you haven't done certain things because your circumstances require that you work, maybe you take care of an elderly family member, or you're a parent who's raising a child. We get that, and so the narrative is important. What I would recommend for those of you who can't take advantage of clinics, look at your local public defender office. Again, I think even more broadly, if it's not a public defender office, is there an office doing community work that you can work with? There are lots of grassroots organizations all across the country that you might spend 10 hours a week working with, so you can really understand the issues that are plaguing the communities we serve. One thing we're well aware of is, as public defenders, we might work in the criminal justice arena, but our approach to criminal justice is crippling marginalized communities in all sorts of ways. And our offices increasingly are looking to partner with community organizations that do good community work. And that can be activist organizations that focus on education or other sorts of things. So I would just find ways. Some of you may have backgrounds where you have loved ones who have personal experiences with the criminal justice system. But what is your story? What is your narrative? What is it that helps us understand that you have put together a collection of experiences that let us know you understand what it is that we're trying to do, and you are anxious. You have an informed commitment to being a part of it. That's really what we're looking for. When will those who get summer positions for 1Ls or 2Ls be notified if they've gotten an offer from a partner office? So Liz is going to come back and talk about the application and answer that question. Let me see if there are other questions that I can help with. And otherwise, I'll jump to Liz, who will answer that along with other logistical questions. Let me just scroll up and make sure I haven't missed anything. I think I've got everything. So if there are more questions for me, I'm going to sign out. But I do want to just end by saying this to you all. I really do believe. I was just at actually, Liz Afton and I, our whole office, we were just at a press conference this morning because we have a couple of women working in our office who are former educators. You may have heard of the Atlanta public school teacher scandal. But there was a very, I would say, overreaching prosecution of some educators in Atlanta over some allegations of teaching, and they cast a very wide net. They ended up charging these teachers under RICO, and a dozen of them maintained their innocence and went to trial and ended up getting convicted under RICO. And two of them who had spent lives as model citizens educating children who who are in the least resource schools in Atlanta, ended up really having their eyes open to what our criminal justice system is about. And they came to Gideon's Promise to work with us. And one of them just lost her last round of direct appeals and is turning herself in today. So we were at a news conference, and one thing that I was thinking about as I was at this news conference was how badly my generation has screwed up this justice system, how far we've strayed from these kind of democratic ideals that we sort of brag about when we talk about our country, and how desperately we need a new generation to come in and fix this, right? The reason I'm so inspired by our law school partnership project, our summer law clerk project, is because I really believe you all are that generation. You are the generation that has to figure out how to fix this. What I understood later in life was you can't fix this in DC, New York, Chicago alone. If we're going to fix it, you've got to come to the places that have been most resistant to change. If you want to do that, we have a community that is waiting with open arms for you to join us and be a part of the change that we so desperately need. So I hope to see many of you in the South training with Gideon's Promise as you embark on a career to transform this justice system. And if that excites you, Liz is going to give you all the details about how you can start to embark on that career. So let me sign out, and Liz is going to come grab my seat. All right? Bye, everybody. Yep. Y'all can also, you can reach out to me. It's just JON@GideonsPromise.org if there's anything you feel like I can do, or if there's a question you didn't want to throw out on this. But reach out to any of us anytime.
Hi, so I'm just here to answer the questions about the summer law clerk and the LSPP application processes. I want to return to the question about the summer positions for 1Ls and 2Ls. So right now, our summer law clerk application is focused on 2Ls, and the deadline for that application is November 2nd, and we are hoping to notify those who will be placed at offices by December 17th. And so that is our working deadline right now to let our 2Ls know when what offices and where they'll be placed for the summer. If we have any open remaining slots, we will do another round of applications for our summer law clerks for 1Ls, because we know that there are guidelines as to when 1Ls can begin thinking about summer jobs and be recruited for those jobs. And so that's why it's kind of a two-part process for the summer law clerk program. And so November 2nd is that deadline, and we anticipate December 17th, we will let people know what offices they will be placed at, their acceptance into the program. And also, just a heads up with the summer law clerk, you not only go to an office to clerk for the summer, 6 to 10 weeks, based on the office, but you also come to Atlanta to meet other summer law clerks, to do a training and to learn about the program and to really orient you before you go to the particular office where you will work for the summer. And so I just have one quick announcement, and then I'll see if there's any other questions about our application process. So if you are interested in receiving our newsletter that keeps you informed about events, our trainings, our programs, application deadlines, so on and so forth, you can send me an email, and I can make sure that you are added to the newsletter and receive information from us about our programs and everything that we have going on. And you can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and we have a YouTube channel. You can just look for Gideon's Promise. That's our name on all the different social media channels. And you can stay posted about our programs and the work that we do, and also the work that our Gideon's Promise trained attorneys are doing in different jurisdictions across the country. Thank you. Have a good day.